And just to tangent a bit on this boss topic, it's interesting that the more possessive bosses would force their way into things rather than delegate, because in a sense they see it as their responsibility to see that it succeeds. But counterintuitively, because they're doing the work themselves and not delegating, subtasking, subdelegating, uh at least in my experience, one person managing the work of 15 people means he's essentially doing 1/15th as good of a job as if that one person was properly trained and doing the tasks in the way that's structured by the system that trained them, you know?
More likely, it's actually 1/15th minus some percentage because chances are, if you have to keep switching tasks, the more tasks you switch to, the more likely your efficiency goes down. And because the assumption is that he'll have the same efficiency as if he was just doing one task uninterrupted, but he's not. He's doing it being interrupted 15 different times.
How do you think that then a boss or an employee in this situation, like the reverse side, they can communicate and get a better relationship so that there's this level of trust and looking out for each other? Like, okay, well, blah, 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 I'll do this, blah, 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 you get that, you know? How do you think that uh, discussion or process should go down?
I think for starters, the trust needs to be earned, and but there's only one. There's a few ways to do it. One of them being showing competence and showing some level of sincerity in their work. It's not like oh, I'm smarter than you, and oh, see you later. It's like, and you got like five, binders on your desk. You're trying to figure out what they want from you. So getting that initial trust is a lot of just the small, sincere steps of, okay, he was trustworthy when I sent him this report, and it wasn't altered to the point of not being recognized, or he didn't steal my work, or he didn't, that kind of thing. And once you have that, okay, he's not going to do anything to the detriment of the company, that's a start. And then there's another hierarchy of, now we can get somewhere where it's more friendly but professional. So we have professional friends. This is the, I can be friendly with you in a work setting. I have no idea who you are outside of work though.
Right.
So you have to go up another tier to be able to make it to there. And a lot of people don't do that, which is why when people quit
They keep them
jobs,
separate.
oh, 100%, there's nothing connecting them anymore. You thought there was, but it was in the job environment. That's where the glue was. And that's where the foundation connections were. So once
Well,
you,
on that
yeah,
specific point, do you believe more in the work is work and then outside work is outside work philosophy, or do you see at work as a potential means to, like, I guess, synergize, have some friendliness so that work could, like, be more than work in the sense like, oh, you're getting the work done, but you're also like good friends with each other and you want to strive to make better efforts for the company or for each other?
that's a complex question because
Yes.
it depends on the industry. I can give you my examples. So in upstream oil, way more on the latter because people live at work. I mean, if you're doing like 60 to 80-hour weeks, chances are you're going to be able to get some synergy if you've got people you like. Even if you don't like the job, you like the people. And that happened with me on a few occasions. But if you get like a 40-hour a week job where people are rather mundane about it, they really don't have a passion about it, chances are that it's going to stay in the work environment only because they already have a life outside of work. They were able to build it without needing all of these employees and employers to do it. Um, but if you get, let's say, taken out of your normal area of operation, like when I had to move out of state, and you do that to like 100 people, you're all in a melting pot. So the tendency to want to hang out outside of work actually goes radically up, and especially since everyone knows what they're going through. So there's this real bonding that happens. UC Davis was like that, very
Yeah,
much like that.
exactly. That's a great insight though, because it's like, yeah, it very much depends on, oh, or am I stuck with people at the 40-hour work week thing that have obviously a life outside of this? Or am I dumped into the melting pot grinder, so to speak, with all these other people who are in the same situation? And we have this shared camaraderie over just the situational stuff, whether it be an oil field or a university campus.
Yeah, and I would say that there's more examples, of course. I mean, if you're in the construction industry, there's some times where it's like, dude, I had to drive with this guy already. I kind of don't want to. I would like a break, um, and that also happens in like the post grad environment. So postdoc, you're still in a university environment. Maybe you want a break. There's exceptions on both sides as well. But at least I know the tendency is if you break people up from their normal area of operation and you put them in to a transplanted working environment, they're away from their families a lot, and the goal is really work oriented, or there's really a lot of fun that happens at work, because it's not always a function of hours. Sometimes it's a function of people really did get to do a lot of fun things, and they're like, hey, well, you aren't just a coworker. I kind of want to go to the movies with you, and like, you're gonna go see the new Star Wars film or something, or hey, are we gonna go play baseball? I know some people at my work play baseball on Fridays, and it was able to manifest through that way through a common interest. But it doesn't always have to be that way.
Right. I think from my experience, the key thing that can uh I guess link the two together more cohesively is just having a sense of personability and knowing the context of the people you're talking to and where they're coming with you in terms of conversation. Like usually if you're at a 40-hour work week type situation, you might be more like, "Oh, okay, well, we're just talking to get information. We're not really want to know that much about each other, let alone like hang out with each other outside of work." Versus, "Oh, I'm being personable with you because I want to nurture this relationship in hopes that XYZ comes out of it." You know.
And I would
So
say, to add to your point, if you can get teams that are kind of in the middle, because I'd say if you start hanging out outside of work, that's you can go a lot of different ways there, but there's a
yeah,
healthy balance where it's like, I'm not afraid of this person. I actually like hearing what they have to say about life and some other insights they have about the company. And we spend a little bit of extra time on figuring out some other problems that we may share. And so there's kind of like an exchange of additional work items getting done, but also having this fun for a few minutes. And that right there is some really good foundations for relationships in your long-term career, because now people understand a little more who you are, as opposed to, oh, he's just a process engineer, oh, he's just an R&D chemist, he's just a QA analyst. It's like, no, 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 they're human beings too. And if they're all in your team and you're cultivating each one, everyone's, when they talk to each other when you're not there, they're going, you know what, he had a really good insight there that helped cultivate this project, and he heard me out on some things that I really enjoyed, getting off of my chest. What do you think? And then if they say something similar, eventually you get that reputation. And I think that's really important when you start moving up in your career. So people don't have to guess who you are. They can just start trusting you, working with you immediately, and getting on with the job. It actually makes things a lot easier.
yeah. I guess in a sense that would you have to try to find coworkers who want the best for you, right?
Yeah, I'd say you want to make friends that want the best for you too.
Yeah, because imagine working in a work environment where, well, the coworker doesn't care about you. They just need what you produce. Versus a coworker who does want the best for you because it's this reciprocity involved, this mutual like, oh, if I rise you up, I rise up with you, sort of thing, you know?
Yes, being able to rise up with them, that there, it starts off being a little more carnal, but once people have the motivation of, well, he's actually more trustworthy than a lot of other folks that I have right now. I'm betting on him, and that's what I would consider a better way to do it. Because if you're always just talking business and there's always this level of distrust between forums and who's doing what job, it makes it really confusing, and people don't always want to announce those problems, and they may not even be taking care of themselves very well by doing that. So, did you
Yeah.
have any other like work insights you wanted to talk about as far as how to get balanced communication between two different individuals?
So I filmed a wedding a couple weeks ago, and on the ride up, I was talking with my friend who, we filmed the weddings together. And I was telling him, I think I need more like socializing, like me specifically. I was telling him this. Maybe I should just get like a part-time job as a barista, just so I master the art of the small talk, right? And I'm telling him this with a straight face just because the point that I'm trying to make is that okay, so I've noticed in my own like socializing ability that my small talk initial meeting thing is kind of stilted and needs some work. So my solution to addressing that is like force myself to make small talk at a job in a job setting with 1,000 like coffee patrons. In my mind, that I believe that would work. But what after that wedding talk, I was like, well, maybe I could try starting it at my current work and then just learning and practicing tricks of the trade rather than just getting a side job I don't need and money I don't need to gain a skill that I can easily do on the job that I currently work, right? So over the past couple weeks since that wedding, I've just been being more personable, like I said, talking, making small talk, trying to crack. The thing that's been the most successful for me uh, is cracking jokes and not being serious because I get this vibe or I give off a vibe that I'm more like serious because I'm quiet. I guess the two get compared a lot than I actually am. When in reality, I can just turn off whatever that is that can come off like that and just start cracking jokes and get the whole room laughing or just like cracking up. So from what I've learned from that is like, okay, I guess being funny or just expressing some kind of personality rather than serious and quiet is more personable. People can trust you more. They feel at ease because they know you specifically, me, is not gonna is not that stern and is not that like heavy handed and it's actually pretty at least my attempt is actually pretty level headed and can be funny if I, decide to remember to turn it on for that day. That's where that 1,000 cuts thing comes in because if I'm having a crappy morning, then that turns off and I'm focusing on the cuts that are dragging me down. So I have to remind myself, like, okay, now you're at work, gotta turn on the social ability a little bit so that I'm more pleasant to be around than if I'm quiet and irritable.
Yeah, that kind of ties into how sometimes people don't feel like they're valuable. A lot of people feel that way. And when you get a lot of people in a job environment that just, okay, I'm just doing my time here and then I want to go because I feel like I'm replaceable. I feel like my boss doesn't understand me. I feel not heard by some of my coworkers, and I only have a little bit of people that are really allies with me. Um, do you have any examples of coworkers not treating themselves as valuable and um, kind of in your area of operation?
Yeah, so my interpretation, at least at my job, is the underlings, the undergrads who are working, um, they need that connection with the paid staff and the higher ups to know that their work actually means something, and they're not just doing busy work that's satisfying like a postdoc's thesis or something. The way that I found that that works best is, talking to them, making jokes with them, and then very importantly, explaining the importance of what they're doing and why it's not like rudimentary work. And every step of the way has all these different components that rely on their work. So giving them the bigger picture of the meaning behind their work rather than just saying, hey, do this work and I'm gonna come back to yell at you if you do it wrong. You know, that's not the way you communicate why their work is important. Because if you're just communicating, oh, if you don't do this work correctly, I'm gonna yell at you, then they're just gonna be tense, and why would they enjoy any of the work they're doing? You know,
Or they just
so by get
leave.
right, and then especially in the parts of a lab or any organization where it's not properly communicated what the point of their work is, you have all these nihilistic thoughts about, okay, what's the deeper meaning of writing documentation that no one's going to read for a process that no one's going to do, and all this other stuff that people might think and the thoughts go through their brain, but they shouldn't even really be having those thoughts because their work should have a purpose that makes sense and they feel like they want to contribute to, you know?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I thought you had a great example with like rock sampling or something in your lab. Isn't that like one of the things you guys do all the time, as far as testing samples and using different pieces of equipment to find just physical data about?
Yeah, so on that front, the most fundamental task that we have in geotech or any form of pavement engineering is batching, which is mixing together rocks in the right weighted mass, and sieving, which is splitting those rocks apart to get what we call the gradation, which is just the percent quantities of a given weight for how many different particle sizes you have. That is the bottom of the barrel, simplest, but most important task you could possibly have in the lab in terms of what happens later down the line. Because if you screw up either the batching or the sieve analysis, what's going to happen is your mix design, your strength properties, your pavement properties, your potentially your binder, how it connects all the rocks together, is going to get messed up. So, plus all that money that goes into one sample, which each sample could easily cost up to $500, right? Now, let's tease that out a bit, right? Why does it cost $500? Well, these rocks came from a quarry down in LA. That rock had to get transported up. Not only transported up, but before it gets transported up, sampled at the quarry by personnel who are getting paid, correct? So it comes up, comes to the lab, is further quartered down and split apart, costs money. Batched, that's the important phase. Do you get the right gradation? Do you get the right sieve analysis? If that's screwed up, all that money that happened before is wasted, basically. And then once it becomes a sample and you start propagating down the line to actually test it, it's like, oh, did any part of that line where people were getting paid 30, 40, $50 an hour to do all those things, did any part of that get screwed up? Yes. Well, that's $500. That's $1,000. Depending on some samples that are extremely expensive, like little tin of binder, because it came from a private company that extracted it off of the rocks, $10,000. Uh, potentially,
How
it's
many
probably more like
how many grams is it?
100 grams.
100 grams for what, 10,000?
Uh, yeah, they're about. It's a
Yeah,
lot of money.
yeah. I was trying to figure out what. So some of our stuff in the API world, it can get crazy. It can get like 50 grand a kilo. It can get we've had, that's one of ours. We've got others that are like in the 70 grand per kilo, and it's
So
just,
well,
yeah. But I mean, think about what you can do with that. Um,
right. So communicating that price to the coworkers and the undergrads is one way of them knowing, and the whole steps, knowing what they're doing in each part of the design of a new like pavement mix, for example. Just knowing what their little part contributes to the bigger whole may give them a greater appreciation. Not guaranteed, because they may be focused on the work at hand and seeing like, oh, I don't understand why this matters, but at least you can communicate it.
Yeah, that'd be a good start. So just showing them kind of the flow diagram of where all these rocks came from, and then how the dollar per gram, so to speak. And then as a broke college student, usually people are like, "Oh, okay, well, there is if I had to pay it personally, that would be a lot of money, and that's one way to do it. How else do you help them seem like they're a valuable human being while you're in the lab?
So in the lab setting, obviously you have to get the work done. So what I've done for a few of the students outside of the lab setting, I've helped them with their resumes. I gave them, so last Thursday, for example, I had a resume workshop where I went over different resumes of different people who work in our lab because we have a repository of resumes for all our postdoc CV and just one sheet resume. So the CVs are longer, they can be up to 10 pages. But for a resume, it's just like the hard bullet point summary of what you know, or tabular format. So I hosted that workshop, and then I also used your points actually, and spoke about how you're supposed to conduct yourself when you're at like your career fair. And I made it a point to go over each of your points and explain why those are very important for the prospective company to see that you're standing out and you're have a more holistic approach to why you're, talking to them in the first place. And then afterwards, I was told by each of them in their own way, like, oh, not only did some ask for a letter of rec for different things they're applying to, right? Because I know them better than the management people. But also they were telling me, "Oh yeah, thank you for the resume workshop. You should do another one with more people. And not only that, you should do one for LinkedIn too, like how to make a LinkedIn thing." I'm like, "Oh wow, this is some great feedback." That's what I was thinking because it's like, okay, well, if they hated it, they wouldn't ask for more, you know?
Yeah, most people don't hate themselves that much.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. Or they don't want to
So
make an impression on you that badly to say something like that.
right. So from a self-esteem standpoint for self-validation thing, that was great. Okay, I gave back a little bit, and then this swarm of undergrads, gave back whatever they could, because obviously, they're still studying. They can only do so much, but this give and take sort of relationship, mentor mentee thing, is very valuable in that context because it's like, okay, well, yeah, during work, we have to follow our procedures and processes, but outside of work, we can, establish that connection where, okay, well, here's some tips and tricks that you can apply to, like going to grad school, getting a job, and then they can communicate back to me whether that's useful or not. And if if I delivered it in a way that made sense and that they can actually pragmatically apply, then I get that feedback, and it's like, it's great.
I think it's great too. It's been so cool to hear about your mentorship stories about that. And I think it's one of the best cures to a lot of modern day. A lot of modern day, it seems like you're in it on your own. You're not really getting. There's help, but it feels like you're on your own mission all the time. Where I don't think a lot of humans in the past really behaved that way. No, I'm going with my company. No, I'm going with my family. There's this real sense of intertwined fates. And well, that's freeing if it's just your own fate, if it's a really good one. I think some people find it kind of lonely and they would like to have some level of expansion to being able to learn things and having someone look out for them. So it's really important for what you're doing, and I'm really glad you're helping out these undergrads. Makes me want to keep going with the mentorship that I'm doing as well over at on the eastern side of Sacramento. So
Yeah, and I just remembered another thing that I started paying attention to recently since we started doing the podcast, which is trying to put myself in the undergrad shoes and wishing, oh, what would I have wished that people above me have done for me, right? And one of the most important things I think that I thought of was, oh, okay, well, I kind of wish more people just talk to me and just feel out what I'm thinking or what trajectory that I'm trying to go. Because I got the sense that because I was quiet people kind of left me to my own devices and didn't check up to me. And yes, it's my problem that I didn't speak up. But from a mentor like standpoint, it's sometimes you can just ask questions and see if that person's willing to engage in a dialogue just to see like, oh yeah, so this is what I'm trying to do. Do you have any tips on trying to get there? But they may have that initial fear of like talking to you because of your position.
Yeah, I think it's really important to break that wall immediately, even if you're not really a mentor for them, but just showing that somebody cared for them really just gives them that. It's like social food. I don't know how else to describe it, or psychological food, perhaps. Like they
Right.
eat it and they go, "Oh, I feel so much better. I feel like someone's heard me out. I understand a little bit more about myself from it. Things don't look so hopeless after all. Things don't look as hard. I may still have a lot of challenges, but now I've got this upgrade. Maybe I can make it." And that a little bit of hope seems to go a long way. I know in the mentees that I had in undergrad, it was so important to break those walls down immediately. And then when they saw that you just kind of just saw their smiles just perk right up because they're just like, wow, someone's actually fighting on my behalf for once. This is great. And then maybe I can bring my friends here. And then they had friends, and we broke down all kinds of restrictions that didn't need to be there. And then we built up some really structured ones that they didn't think they needed, like how they should study and they should focus on in their internships. And it was so cool to see their value just start exponentially rising together because they decided they were going to be on a mission to get mentored and they were going to get better, and they devoted themselves to it. And it's so cool because I talk to them now, and they've really kept a lot of those foundations and to build their own next sector of their lives. And I'm really glad they did it because they were complicit in making the mentorship family what it was. It wasn't just what I was doing; it was also their participation.
Yeah, and the word family really ties it cohesively together because it's not like you're the patriarch yelling at all the kids or whatever. It's like, no, it's this relationship you're forming with them where you're not just get this ego trip telling them all this information, you feel better. It's like, no, no, you're communicating with them, your experience, so that in turn they can communicate back their experience and ask for help. And it's rewarding.
Yeah, we did that with just even doing inventory. We had these boxes that were left over, and no one knew what to do with them for ChemiCar. And I was like, you know what? We're going to do an inventory project. Here, I'm going to show you how to use Google spreadsheets, which seems really dumb, right? Because people could learn that like that. But that wasn't the idea. It was to show trust and show that we were making the team better on our own, that people cared enough. And that's when I was starting to even not put so many projects on because they were picking up other projects. They were going, "Hey, could we learn how to mill for next year?" And it's like, "Yeah, yeah. Here's how you sign up. Here's how you get it." Cool. I'm gonna use the lathe, the mill, the bandsaw. I'm gonna learn all that stuff. And it's like, wait, I didn't even talk to him about doing that. He's already going for it. And then another person's like, "Hey, could I be the lead for this next year?" It's like, okay, but before you do that, you're gonna want to know these things. So we share stories of things going wrong, like with someone wanted to be the lead chassis leader, and I told them about the stories of how they didn't have the car ready for spring quarter, and we had to like do all this stuff last minute and show them how to plan and what parts they would need, all that stuff. And we gave it to them, and it wasn't just me. This was like my friend Steve, who was leading the team at the time, and said, "Yeah, this is the parts we need. This is when we need to get it done by." And he gave us this timeline that team never really was used to. And I think it's because the project wasn't that hard, but people didn't take it seriously enough. So then it would just turn into this mad dash in spring quarter when it didn't need to
Right.
be. And our car actually worked. It was just a sulfuric acid, lead acid battery. Nothing to it.
Nice. Yeah, I'm curious um, about how, for in like a work setting or just in normal life, the best methods someone can take to find those valuable connections. And I think in my own experience, it feels as though I wouldn't be connected with so many different people if I didn't speak up or have those two-way street, right? So if I didn't speak up, I wouldn't have made those connections. But if those people didn't like seek me out either in their own way, those connections wouldn't be made either. So at least from my perspective, it's like, okay, well, if I'm the only one in control at the moment, what can I do to make those connections? And I guess what I've concluded is, okay, well, I need to figure out my confidence level and like, oh, can I actually approach people who I want to form a friendship or relationship with? And well, form that relationship. How am I going to do that? Do I have the confidence to do that? So I guess in your life, Jacob, how do you feel, or what do you feel is like some of the necessary skill sets you need to raise your confidence level to make yourself feel like valuable enough to get the help from other people that you need, or just to, feel like you're included in whatever family you're trying to develop?
That's a great question because a lot of it has to do. You don't really need that many skills if you want to get in, but it depends on what road you want to take. So if you're going humbly, so that's a skill on its own. Knowing you don't know everything and showing what you've run into that you don't know and how you want to overcome. The sense of bravery, that's over. I think that's underrated actually, because bravery, it takes some bravery to go up to strangers that you don't know that may just shut you down, or you might just get rejected, and you'll feel all sorry for yourself. And it's like, it's not about that. It's you're on a journey. You want to find out what's going on here, and you can't do it without recon missions. So going up to these people and like in my case, I went up to like juniors, and I'm going, hey, I've heard a lot of horrible things about these classes. What does it take to really get through it? And some people would scoff me off and say, yeah, just you wait till you get to these classes next year. They're gonna, just destroy you. And I get that kind of answer. And then I also get the other answer of like, do you really want to know? And it's like, yeah, yeah. And it's like, here's a flash drive. Look at these. This will be a start. And then they, no joke, gave me the files, and I was like, huh. So now I can look at some of their work and be like, oh, here's a homework problem they were doing. And of course, they change it up all the time at school, but it was like, it's the same subject matter. That's what mattered. And I go, so I don't understand partial differential equations yet. I'm only doing diffie q's, but they have some of that in here. I don't know how this pieces together, but I recognize some of the functions that were taken as a derivative, and how they were able to isolate and integrate and all these things. I'm like, oh, okay, so they're doing some things that I know, but I don't know how it fits together, and I have no idea what their boundary conditions mean. I also know context, but I have something to start with. So bravery, this sense of humility, and getting ready to talk to people. It's like you gotta know the language, right? So not just the English language, which is the baseline, but also getting familiar with the academic language you want to get involved with. So that's three right there you can start with. And motivation, I would say, is overrated, not underrated. It's
Yeah.
because it's not about, oh, I feel good, I should do this today. It's more, I am willing to do this even though I don't want to today. And that was important for me because I was like, there wasn't a plan B. I'm like, I need to get this thing done. My parents are paying for this college education that I supposedly need, and they're paying a fair amount of money for this, and I feel really terrible that I can't pay them back for this. I need to do well so that I can show them, look, I have done everything possible to make sure your investment made sense and it wasn't just squandered, because they worked really hard for that. I saw my parents, they worked for it every day, and they gave it to me free of charge. They didn't say anything, and I'm like, I don't know if I could have been that way. So you know what? As a response, let me absolutely show you what I'm capable of and see what it can produce. And much to my surprise, I actually made it, along with yourself. And that took a lot of humility and bravery. Those were the two that I needed the most. I mean, the other two being academically savvy with just being able to learn and then using the English language to communicate with everybody. So, what do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting because I didn't realize the importance of asking for help until my fifth year, which is quite late. Yeah, because I'm of the mindset that if I can figure it out on my own, I can do it. But the reason why I didn't realize it was because until I went into this one specific class where they force group participation, I started to realize like, oh, wait a minute. Um, the reason why they are encouraging you to work in groups is because in real civil engineering practice, you're not siloed off in a bubble doing everything by yourself. You're always constantly collaborating with other people. And that became more apparent when the whole class was structured under the assumption that everybody was sharing their work and working together to get the solution. And once I saw, like, oh, you have to go to office hours to get some of the answers. Every other class before that, I didn't have to do that, so I didn't go. It wasn't until that year where it was like, oh wait, it's not explicitly told, but the idea was the work was so hard that if you wanted to silo yourself, that wasn't on the table. You weren't allowed to do that because then you wouldn't solve the problems, which was a wake up call for me, a quite late wake up call. But ever since then, I've been more receptive to asking for help and then for not just, being in my own little bubble and trying to solve things on my own.
I'm glad that you better late than never. I mean, a lot of people in the industry, you'd be surprised how they just kind of jump in and they try and pretend like they know everything, and it just totally is egg on face for them because, well, I mean, no one's doing that. People are working in groups. It's a team effort, whether we like it or not, because there's a lot of things going on that we can't control. Hence the team thing. So better to just find your connections to the team, cultivate what you need to cultivate, and humbly walk up the hill uh, with them, and in hopes that that would be the best strategy. Um, so, what else did you have in mind about um, getting people ready for life and making sure they feel valuable and the like? Did you have anything else to add about that topic?
Well, I guess in the last month or so, just reaching out to past connections and realizing that these people still exist and that they're not just names with a profile picture. And that
Fellow man talk
sometimes,
people.
yeah, man talk people. Like that was a fairly new development, but still a nice development. Like, oh yeah, everyone still wants to talk with each other. For context, basically, I reached out to our old dorm mates that Jacob and I had in 2010, 2011, long time ago, and we lived with briefly in our apartments too in 2011, 2012. But basically, I reached out to one of them. And he was like, "Oh yeah, we all want to like talk again and like catch up and just see where everyone's at." And I'm like, "Okay, well, if it wasn't for just like this dialogue that Jacob and I are having, or the dialogue I was having with the other people who are probably going to be in that talk, everyone would be kind of siloed off into their individual relationships. But the way this friend group formed was as a group. So naturally, it would make sense that we would come together at some point to just rehash things on the 10-year anniversary, no less, close to it, 2020. Well, 9 years, I guess, but still, long time from when all of our individual like quirks and personalities were interacting with each other. We can see how the echoes of our interactions have rippled across time and whether or not those have affected us in a meaningful way or just see the prosperity of our friends who we had a meaningful connection with in a certain time and place in our lives. So if I didn't reach out to like Evan and I just kept, you know, um, writing him on Facebook or whatever, then I feel like we wouldn't have the same connection as, well, if we just had a vocal conversation, seeing each other face to face virtually. You can see their reaction. You can like kind of gauge where they're coming from. It's just a whole different seeing the other person or just vocally speaking to them is a whole other interaction than text based. It's kind of crazy how uh, big of a difference it is because of how much different body cues and like physical cues and all that other stuff that can go on with just that visual or vocal reaction. So I would say to wrap up that point, just that learning to reach out to connections that you thought were like dormant or lost or just not as strong as you could and not being weirded by that or not taking the initiative of doing so. Just do it and see what happens. And the worst that could happen is that they don't respond, which is the same as where you were before you did it, right?
With a slight downturn. I mean, some people kind of like, oh, well, they're kind of somewhere else, and then you crawl out of that little bump, and then
That realization, yeah.
yeah, yeah, and it's like, oh yeah, that was 9 years ago. Oh well, but it didn't.
No.
Surprisingly enough, the it was a dormant friendship, not a dead one, which is kind of a surprise because you think proximity would have killed it. Sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, each of us in the siloed sense, to my understanding, still communicate with each other in their own way. But as a cohesive whole, obviously that's been dormant, or if not just straight dead for some time. So to rekindle and resurrect that in a sense, it's kind of exciting because it's like, oh, I don't know what to expect. This is new uncharted territory, which is, interesting.
It's it's uncharted territory in a sense, but it's the person at least. We know who they are, or the people we know who they are, but we don't know who
Right.
they are to the extent that they are today. We kind of know who they are.
I have a good question. Who in who in your past has reached out and tried to reconnected with you, and then I guess have brought you up to, this more. I wouldn't want to use the word enlightened, but have brought you up in a sense that you've learned more about yourself or become a better person because of that reconnection.
I think I got a person in mind. So there was a time since I've been back, and I wasn't having such a great time last year in summer, and I initially said something, and then it kind of sat for a little bit, but then Steve, he says, Jake, call me. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll call you. Sure. Hey, what's up, man? And then he just kind of helped me get through whatever I was going through. I had a not so great summer. I had um, waiting on a particular job that was 7 months due on a promotion, and I had some other relationship issues going on that wasn't so great, and I wanted to talk to him about just everything that was going wrong, and then they just kind of say, you know what, just hang on, you're gonna get through it, and people, relationships with people, they have a tendency to heal if they're good, and if not, cut them off, and then it'll be fine. You can do it with grace. You don't have to do it with crazy amount of
Animosity,
yeah
yeah.
animosity, which I used to do that. I used to do that when I was a teenager, big time, because I really didn't like that. I was anyone
But
who had
but
that
to
level.
what but to what extent should you give grace to your friends?
Man, I was gonna save this for later, but fine, we're going in. Um, we're going in. Like, this is I didn't even tell you about Steve. It, so grace to my friends, you really got to start with to what extent are they your friends? So figure out where you stand. Um, but I would say giving the benefit of the doubt would be the start because you don't quite know what they may be going through. It helps to have a fair amount of data if they are doing something malicious or they're being just not so great friends. And with that being said, I would say give them the benefit of the doubt normally. And if you find yourself in a spot where they aren't really helpful, they are kind of dragging you down, that's when you start cutting those environmental situations first but not the person yet. If they really are a good friend, that they'll will eventually have an environment where they'll want you to thrive. So then they'll meet that need. It might be less frequency, but they'll still meet it. And eventually, if the friendship is getting to the point where it really is dragging you down, and there's not really much to gain from it, and you're noticing that their mission's different. So different mission, not helping your character, taking time away from you with other priorities that are higher. Those are three key indicators of maybe it's time to gracefully start moving away. And you don't have to just go whack, because that's
Right.
kind of abrasive, and especially if it's a long-term friendship. You don't want to do that with somebody then, because that's they're still a valuable human being intrinsically, God
Right.
given. So uh,
Did this happen with you and Steve, or is that a completely different scenario?
no, which is why I didn't want you to bring it up yet. But either way, that answers that question from my perspective. Steve, on the other hand, was awesome. He really helped out with getting me on my feet when I was 20 through 22. He was a transfer student that I met up with in 2012, and we did some homework exchanges and kind of dialogued about how we should fix things. And before I knew it, he was in my friend group along with 5 other transfer students, and it was just an absolute blast having them around, because I was like this youngster, and
Right.
Steve's 6 years older than me, so he's got a little more experience, and he used to be in refrigeration, and he was giving me industry tips and about how people sometimes screw each other over, and he was just giving me all this stuff that I had no idea, because I had never really had a full-time job longer than 6 weeks before. So he helped me be cognizant and cautious with people, and just being able to navigate through life with some of the nastier parts of it, which I kind of appreciated, because a lot of people just want to talk about the nice parts. He's willing to say, when people screw you over, here's some tips. When people are going to start lying at work, start keeping tabs on them. Start taking this data. Uh, be aware of their environment and how they talk to you, because they may be saying more than what they're actually saying. That kind of like man talk, because that was like real talk, which is how we use the phrase. He would say that kind of stuff to me, along with all the homework and stuff, and all the friends that we got along with it. Heck, I'm getting chats about from our instant messenger right now from them. We're still in contact after all this many years, after 5 years out of school.
What do you think is the significance of someone being honest with you, providing you, as you said, real talk?
I mean, the actual inadequacies of the human nature. I mean, if people never talk about a problem and you just kind of ignore it,
Like
it
a dragon under the bed?
yeah, or maybe it was just a dust bunny or something at first, and then
Right.
it just kind of mutated into one. Um,
Sure.
he goes after some of the stuff that people don't always feel comfortable talking about, and I really appreciated that, because not everyone's willing to do it, which I already said. Um, so he was just a brother to me, and someone else said that. I think I had another friend, Matt, um, who I considered a completely awesome friend, and he said, just like, no, Steve's your brother. Like, seriously, I've seen the way he talks to you. I've seen the way he cares for you, and that to me is like, dude, that's some good stuff, man. He helped me with upstream oil, dealing with things over in Schlumberger. Um, yeah, I can't say enough good things about the guy, and he just kept thinking about how would he orient his life such that it would be a good one, that he wouldn't waste his time, and he had his flaws too. But I mean, like any human, but he seemed to pick himself right back up, and I really appreciate about that. He challenged me about the church too. Actually, he would be asking me the hard questions, and I would be going back and trying to figure him out. And it actually encouraged me to be not a worse believer, but a higher believer in Christianity from those talks. So, uh, let's see here.
That
Christianity.
those,
Yeah,
those sound like a great.
was that like 7 different things? I started losing count.
Well, yeah, those sound like great characteristics of a good friend, right?
Yeah, I, I miss him. I miss having him around in California. It was really cool having him right next to me, and we do homework like all the time together. And he would just crack jokes, and um, he'd try and screw with people, and he would be. So we had one last tangent about Steve. So we had four smokers in our group, and they're all transfer students. One of them was our chain smoker, Sean, and if nothing's going on, no, doesn't matter what day it is, he's smoking. So he's my control. We had another friend, Carm. He would occasionally smoke. So, okay, we have a little bit of stress, but nothing out of the ordinary. When Steve's smoking, we've got a problem because he's stealing it from Carm and he doesn't buy his own cigarettes because he quit. So if he's stealing them, and I've seen three people smoke, we're not doing so great. We're probably in
Yeah,
for a hard week. When
right.
Bilal's smoking, he would quit for months at a time. We are screwed. Like, just if we are done, like that's finals week, and it's just
Yeah.
we're really not doing so well. So that was how I could tell if we were doing well or not. So that's Steve. He's stealing from Car. That was great too. He's like, I don't even like this brand.
Nice. Huh. Well, I guess that's one metric to know if you're doing all right.
Well, it
Just how
just
many
came
how
about.
many
I,
smoke.
I I noticed it one day, and I'm going, huh. Well, how about that? And I told them about it too. I was like, look, you're all smoking. We're screwed. And they're like, what? It's like, look, Bilal, when was the last time Bilal had a cigarette? Oh, 4 months ago. Yeah, we're screwed. Yeah, that was like in August or something.
So the corollary to this, or the contrapositive, whatever the right word is, uh, when you have bad friendships, people trying to drag you down, what, in your experience, are the consequences of those relationships, friendships that you've had, of people who don't want the best for you?
Fine, but you got to give me an example too, because
Sure.
I we know what about that. But for me, how friends in the past have pulled me down, it's actually similar to ways that you pulled people down when you were in high school, not showing up on time, because that's a lack of respect for the other person.
Right.
So that means my time is more valuable than um, theirs. So I'm just going to show up whenever I feel like it or not. And that's kind of a pain because I kind of want some consistency.
A
Um,
certain level of self-centeredness and not reciprocity.
yeah, lack of reciprocity. Thank you. That's the second one. That's the second one. Uh, so you're putting in most of the work, and the rest of them just kind of like, hey, we're going to go do this. You should come, but we don't care. You know, if they're saying things like that, it's like, oh, okay. It's kind of blunt. Usually they won't say it like that. It'll be more subtle. It'd be like a Facebook group thing, and it's like, oh, let's go to this event. And then you see like no one's responding, but then you see like five people that went. It's like, wait, what? Oh yeah, we were in this like impulsive conversation like 20 minutes before it started, and we drove over there. It's like, okay, that's okay. That's not so great. Uh, and how else have they pulled me down? Not exactly believing in what I wanted to do, and this is kind of superficial. But I'd say in other ways it's not. So if you've ever had somebody that, yeah, you can't do that. That's not going to happen. You're just going to be with us, and then you're going to be complaining about how much work you did, and then now you're back right in our friend group. You know, we're all going down together, and it's like they won't say that outright, but what they will say is that they'll have that slight disapproval of, I don't think you should be working this much. I don't think your dreams are realistic. They'll make those hints, but what they're
Like
really getting,
doubts in your life.
really trying to put in like that I would say well flowing doubt.
So when Steve was doubting you, that was a good form of doubt, like because it wasn't actually a doubt because it was a inquisitive question that came from a good place, correct? For say your religious beliefs.
He had a really good talk about how come God allows suffering. And I found a sermon about that, and I listened to it from a John MacArthur, and I'm going, ah, okay. Well, one, that's very narcissistic for us to say good and evil. Okay, that's important. Okay, so we are implying that we know good and evil better than God does. Oh, that is very narcissistic if God exists, because otherwise what's going on here. The second thing being, it's like a 75-minute sermon, but he also talks about how God can make good out of evil. And that's the Genesis 50:20 moment where Joseph forgives his brothers. And he talks about how even though you sold me into slavery, God made it for good, such that we'd saved many lives this day. And he was able to feed all his brothers during a famine in Egypt, because he was able to climb the ladder in Egypt by some miracle. So Steve did a lot of inquiries that he had that were actually stopping him from believing about God. And I tried to answer them to the best I could. He still had a little bit of abrasion to it, but he at least appreciated the dialogue and said, you know what, I'll think about it, but I'm still pretty sure I'm right. And I was like,
Yeah.
all right, fair
Well,
enough.
it sounds like the key there is dialogue, right? Just being open minded enough to engage in that dialogue in the first place.
And actually was saying, hey, this actually bothers me, and I still can't get my head around it. But if you do find out more, I'm curious because it's still bothering me. So even though the dialogue ended, that at least at that time, I could tell that it was like, hey, that's kind of a big concerning point, because if this is all wrong and I'm right about this, all of this faith business has nothing to do with why we're really here. And fair enough. Okay, he's going that route, but I would going the more hopeful route of, well, if God really does exist, he really does have the best intentions and the best plan for people. So
Similarly, if great friends exist, they have the best intentions for their friends rather than nefarious dragging them down nature to them, correct?
yeah, evil spirited. That's not good, because the
So
last thing you need is, yeah.
I actually have an example of this where uh for friends who don't want the best for me, um not me per se, but just people other than themselves. So they kind
Okay.
of siphon themselves off from like a mutual participant in conversations or friendships or whatever. This is what a narcissist would do, right? So essentially, they think they're the center of the world and all interactions revolve around them. So for the narcissists I know, their tendency is to focus only on them and do their very best to sabotage and screw over the friends that they have around them so that they look great by comparison. And yes, I have some of those friends. They're kind of at arm's length, but the idea of me communicating with them is I'm trying to pull them away from that self ego and that narcissism to try to get them to see, like, hey, there are people who care about you despite you seemingly still focusing on yourself. And my understanding of narcissistic energy, though, is that that's kind of like a mosquito bite friendship potentially, where they're just sucking off of you and taking what you have to offer without reciprocating, giving things in return. So that's where the arm's length distance is. They can take the bites out of all my arm, but they won't actually get like close to me because, well, I can get close to them if and only if they're willing to, drop their sabotaging personality traits and try to make it more of like, okay, we can rise up together.
So what about these friends that drag you down? You got to put them at arm's length. What about them? You got some more dialogue about them?
Yeah, so essentially what I've learned for those specific individuals is, especially if they're more self-oriented, to try to give them tools and perspectives that allows them to see different points of view in the world outside of their own point of view and not only acknowledge them as perfectly valid, if not correct, perspectives, because they don't have to necessarily be correct, but they have to at least see that that could be a possibility. And in a sense, that's kind of like broadening their ability to imagine that more people exist outside of themselves that have different perspectives, which may sound kind of trivial with more empathetic people, but for someone who's more narcissistically inclined, they only really know that they exist and everything else around them is working to their benefit, right? But if you can kind of flip that script and try to show them like, hey, there are other people, they have these perspectives, and rather than fighting and butting heads against them and burning bridges, you could try instead to be friends, make jokes not at their expense, but just situational jokes, develop a wit, do all these different things apart from what you're currently doing. And then you might rise up along with them rather than just be isolated and put in the back of whatever these people's minds or perspective these people will have of them.
Yeah, and I would say life isn't about, it's like a four-person race, and then if you just blow up the other three cars, you win. It's like,
Right.
cool, you win by yourself, and that's it. And it's like, okay, so what happens to those three people? Didn't they have lives and people that love them? And, you know, that doesn't seem very, pro human. That seems very anti human.
Right. And from that narcissist perspective, I would say that it becomes very isolating the more years that pass on because when you're only out for it for yourself into your teenage years, maybe that's fine. You still have your whole life ahead of you. But if you're reaching into when you have to start a family, right? And you're still looking only out after yourself somehow. It's like, holy cow, you're gonna be a terror with your kids and with your wife because you're still like the center of the show. It's not it's not a successful strategy and it's a lot of unnecessary suffering that might be able to be alleviated with um I guess some self-awareness and some really good friends who will pull you out of that narcissist trap.
And that is a trait of a good friend.
Right. So a good friend on the flip side of that would reach out and offer help when even if not asked, but not in a sense where you're trying to fix their life, but you maybe can offer like a perspective on it because you don't want to fall victim to your own like charity because you might become the kind of person who's only helping other people and then you lose sight of yourself and your own needs. That's like the extreme on the other end. So you have to kind of be aware of that extreme where you're not tempted to only try to fix other people's problems. You still have your own, probably, and maybe you should be addressing those problems first before you go taking on someone else as like a project of yours and trying to raise them up, all the while you're falling behind. It's like that's not very fair to yourself. So a way of preventing that is just being self-aware enough to know like, okay, yes, I should fix my problems. And then once I'm aware of that, I can try to be like a mentor to someone else and then go that direction. I think in my own life, that's what I've been doing. Originally, I was trying to help other people too much without the masking, and they got irritated because it's like, why are you helping me? Like, have you looked at where you're at? And I'm like, oh, yeah, maybe I should do me first. And now I'm in a position where it's like, okay, well, I can see other people struggling, but I'm probably in a better off position. Maybe I can help a little bit. And then that's where the mentorship stuff came in that I spoke about earlier.
That I like what you said about people get annoyed about you helping too much. There is a sense of self independence people want. And I think once you start breaching that as a mentor, it really starts making these mentorship meetings more uh, involuntary. Like, like I have to go to this thing. I have to do this. I have to talk to him about these items, as opposed to a voluntary. Oh, he's helping to an extent, and I need to bridge the gap on everything else now that I have the information. So
Right.
that is something I did run into with Chemicar at the end. I was giving meetings that didn't need to happen because everything was over. So it's like, what? There was a point where I was going, oh, I'm out of material. Well,
Right.
okay, we'll just end early. So we ended early, and then people were like, oh, cool. Okay, so it's not as long, and we don't have to drag it out. So I appreciated that about um, when when to know the self independence meter is being breached, that boundary.
Right. And then that feedback loop of checking in with yourself is like, oh, am I just doing the work for them? That's not what you're supposed to be doing. It's still their life. They can live their life as they see fit, and you can mentor where you see fit. And then hopefully voluntarily, as you said, you come together and you can connect on this synergetic level that you mentioned.
Yeah, and if you steal their independence, they're not going to like you very much for that, because something knows in their being that you're making them weaker, not stronger, and well, that defies mentorship. That's now we're now okay. Here's not helping at all. Here's mentorship somewhere in the middle. Here's self independence, and then here is like helicopter mom. You know,
Right.
you go the further you go that way, the more likely you're gonna make an incredible amount of unwanted resentment, and you're gonna make them weaker at the same time. So, and then come on, it makes sense to just back off just enough where they keep their self independence and they can still be in the mentorship boundary. Uh, so now they can be strong as opposed to just, oh, I need this mentor before I can do any work. And so, yeah, I'm not.
Right. You don't want to handhold essentially because eventually the kid has to grow up and face the all the scary aspects of the world at some point.
Well, handholding's fine at first. It's just like, do you handhold at 18 with your kid? It's like, no, no, you don't. They can go to school, they can walk around, they have friends. But when they're 5, it's a little more like, okay, man, like here we go. I'm walking you to class. It's your first go around. It's like,
There's always a graduation date on on anything you learn, essentially.
yeah, there's a shelf life even. So,
Yeah.
okay, but now it's your 5th day. Okay, I'm not walking you all the way. I'm gonna drop you off and then walk you to the curb. Okay, and then like the next month, all right, man, get out, have a great day, and then they get out and they walk to class, and it's like, wow, didn't have to. They are independent, and some people just jump right in. They just say, forget this. But some people they need their cowardice to be kind of stomped out.
Right.
Not everyone's the same, so
Makes sense. Yeah. Um, I guess the last question I have for this podcast kind of goes back to overcoming past situations where you had issues in taking care of yourself or allowing yourself to have enough, um, I guess, fortitude to know that, hey, I'm valuable. I deserve to help myself rather than help someone else first and ignore my own problems. So I guess in your life, when was the
no.
last time? Yeah, yeah. When was the last time you felt like, oh, I've kind of lost sight of taking care of myself? And what kind of made you can't come out of that and realize, oh wait, I need to, focus on me, address those issues, and then properly like understand why I'm feeling this way.
So I can think of several examples, but let me see if I can pick one that's most relevant. Um, so one way would be over when I was in high school and I wasn't doing so well with my grades, and I couldn't figure out exactly what was going on. But I had some personal issues going on with like a breakup, and I had just some friends that some of them came to my aid, but there were a lot of them that I thought that didn't, and I was kind of mad about that for a short time frame. But all that didn't matter once I really started seeing this because grades really define a lot about you in an academic setting. You're just like, oh my goodness, this is like a baseline. I can't get this right. I can't get a lot of things right. And I'm like, I'm 16. I don't leave Porterville. I don't get a job. I don't get anything. I don't get a degree. I'm stuck. So there was this outcry, let's put it that way, from my psyche saying, regardless of what's going on, and he's like, he just dropped the hammer and he's like, get after your classes. I don't care if you hate Spanish. I don't care if you hate chemistry or biology or even, Justin Adams over in band or whatever. You may hate every last class you have. I don't care. Get in there and make sure that at the end of the semester you succeed. And it was like it was just this absolute outcry, and it kind of shook me because I was like, wow, because you never know when that's going to happen from your own psyche. Sometimes it's just this gentle tap, and sometimes it's just this absolute outcry. So then after that, I was like, well, what first? Because you're kind of looking at a broken life, and you're, well, this, I don't like this class. I don't like this class. Okay, let me do my homework for this one. Okay, and it was just this. Okay, we're gonna grind it out for another 10 weeks. Okay, maybe I could do better on this homework assignment. And it's like, okay, I'm still sucking at, let's say, Spanish and what else is going on? Oh, jazz band, for example. Like, I'm not doing so well there. Okay, fine. We'll pick those up later, though. First, you got to get your math class up. Okay, I'm doing my math. Okay, and then math, band, Spanish, and just eventually each one, it was like, okay, we start seeing the momentum going. And then, of course, the weight doesn't come off in one fell swoop. A lot of it starts coming off just as you take on the journey. You go, I am willing to accept the capacity of suffering at this point. Let's do it.
And you get a positive feedback loop developing with more stuff you keep accomplishing.
You could argue, though, I didn't fix the whole problem, and I slooped right back into it in summer when everything was over, and I just was like working out at the gym, and I was like playing video games, and that wasn't the whole story. That was just getting through the next hurdle.
How was the trend line, though? Was it up or down overall?
Overall, it was up. It had to be. Otherwise, I wouldn't have made it out. I got my top 4% of my class in high school. Which it's Porterville, it's Porterville, California. Who cares? Like that's a small little town. It's not like San Francisco or like these really high competitive areas in Northern California, which I would find out.
Sure, but there's no need to cut down your accomplishments because yes, it's top 4% of any like random however many high school seniors you had, 300, 400.
Somewhere around there, yeah.
Yeah, and even if that's not the top 4% of San Francisco, that's still an accomplishment in its own right.
Yeah, and then there were other problems that will naturally come up because there's always the next mission. And then you find out that, oh, it wasn't just about getting to college and reading books on the grass and kind of relaxing for 4 years. It's like, no, all the opposite. It's a completely new adventure and there's completely new risks.
Right.
What about you? You need to talk a little bit at the end of the podcast here. What happened to you?
So, I think in my situation, the thing I needed to realize sooner rather than later that aside from asking for help, which I'm not very desiring of because I'd rather try to address it myself. Focus initially just on the simplest stuff. I know Peterson talks a lot about, oh, if you can't like fold your bed in the morning, maybe you can fold like a sock or something. Do something that's the equivalent but of a smaller degree, and if you're able to do that, then maybe you can fold the bed. Um, when I was figuring this stuff out, like post high school, let's say in early college, it was more or less like, okay, well, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of just, being irritable all the time. I need to like figure this out and try to address whatever ails me, some nebulous thing in the background. And okay, I did the simplest things first, obviously, which I've talked to at length already, is like, okay, eating. Foods I eat, good or bad. And then just choosing the foods is a pretty straightforward thing. It's just what's harder is developing the discipline not to eat the foods that you want to eat. And there's actually a lot of stuff in the last 6 to 8 years post college or late college and early post college where it's like, okay, well, some of that stuff was just like stopping it. Like, I don't use Reddit anymore. I used to be religiously on Reddit every day for a few hours a day
What?
on my phone. Yeah. Like I was constantly using it as some form of an escape or some kind of dopamine hit for my boredom. This was 2010 through 20 something. Too late. Probably like 2015. So all the way through college basically, but I cut it off post college because it wasted too much time. Maybe earlier than that, I forgot. But became this own little world that I was living in that was apart from the real world where all my problems were. And I could see the appeal of that separate world, where it's like, okay, I can laugh at these people who I'm never going to interact with. I can laugh at their memes and their jokes. And it's this constant fueling of itself apart from where I actually exist in the world. And it was enticing, but it wasn't productive. So I shoved that out of the picture and I brought back my world into the frame. And then I tried to fix that in the best way I could with the incremental improvement tactic. And this is all pre Peterson, mind you. So when I read Peterson's book and this stuff came along, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I've been trying that because obviously I didn't start at the top of the mountain. I had to work my way up, right? So when he wrote that, it was kind of like an affirmation that okay, the other like stuff I was reading online of trying to get myself out of this irritable rut um, worked, and it's probably based off of a broader psychological like basis for it. It's like okay, take on a little bit of tasks, get a little bit happy, take on the bigger tasks, get bigger happy. So, but some of the stuff is like yeah, quit hard turkey. Reddit, for example. Other stuff's like okay, eat properly and don't eat these foods, and then yeah, cut the foods out. It's hard at first, but then you adapt to it. So at least in my life, that's been the way that I've kind of navigated that.
I like your response to his book, but I actually had a completely different reaction because when I was reading Rule 2, um, he was talking about how it's the converse to the golden rule, which is love your neighbor as yourself. And I never saw it the way that he did, or Carl Jung rather, that said yourself is also valuable because if you treat yourself as you would treat your neighbor, and if you treat your neighbor with value, it's equal. There
Right.
is a level of equality there that says you need to take care of yourself in order to do that.
What was that tweak in perspective for you that made you
Like
finally
put the Carl Jung thing, and then I love what he said about why can't you take your pills? That was like right in the first part of the chapter, and I was like, that is a good question. I really don't. He's like, yeah, you probably take better care of your dog than you take care of your own pill management, and I mean
right.
pills like in terms of like supplements, for example.
Yeah.
So I'll take like B12 or um, omega 3 and that kind of thing. But I'm like, yeah, how come I don't take them every day? That kind of make it's like. So I read more about it and I was like, maybe he's got a point there. And then he keeps referencing Genesis and all these other problems that have been in the world for a while. But the big one was taking care of yourself as you would take care of your neighbor. And I go, well, how come I don't do that? And I think a lot of it's guilt. And I don't know if it's useful guilt. I think it's just flat out guilt. Like it doesn't have any value. It's just guilty for being alive
Is that
almost.
that's like a self-esteem thing, the way you're describing it.
I don't know if it's self-esteem because self-esteem. I'm not exactly a fan of that word. I'm thinking it's more of a internal problem with how you see yourself. Because yeah, I don't know if it's quite self-esteem, but I guess we can call it that for now. Um,
Some idea that's similar to self-esteem.
Similar to self-esteem, there is this sense of an internal wrongness with you, and you feel guilty, so you would rather just not take care of it. But it's actually no, all the more contrary. There is search out and see if you can find a way to take care of yourself. And I really liked we said that in that book, because then when we got to rule three, it's like, well, now that you can treat yourself like you would treat your neighbor, now you really can move forward in getting your friends to orient and take care of you just as you take care of them. At least getting a reciprocity going, kind of like a motor.
Right. Yep.
And then now you've got these circles of friends that really are just dynamite. And I remember having that in school, and it was just so cool to have them, because it you could argue if I didn't have that, I wouldn't have had the wattage to even make it through the chemical engineering program. And then now in real life, it's post college, I've had to redesign that motor because of proximity, of course. But there are ways to do it, and there are ways to get involved and take care of folk. And a lot of it was in the professional life at first, and then I was like, well, maybe we could do the mentorship thing again, and maybe there can be something similar to that to help people that I'm wired for, because it's kind of hard to help people that you're not wired for. It's you feel like you're just kind of just moving parts around without actually integrating them into one piece.
Yeah.
So I love what he said about rule three, because he talks about these biker guys. That remember that biker that like kept trying to like sell him like appliances, like here's my microwave, give me $20. And
Yeah.
I remember that in the book, and he had the bravery to say to him at 2 a.m, hey, don't, I'm not going to buy your microwave. I'm not going to buy your silverware. My wife's trying to sleep, and I would appreciate it if you would leave. And he gave him like that 5 second stare, and he thought he was going to get beat up, but he didn't. He just turned around and left after that 5 seconds.
Right.
So I like what he had to say about those, because there is a sense of information that I don't think I had. That if I had that, I think my motors would have been able to run a lot easier. So it was like the lubricant needed for making the motor run.
Yeah.
So I really
I
like
think
those two chapters.
right. I think to tie it all together, at least for rule 3 and making friends with people who want the best for you, um, establishing some sort of camaraderie with more than just, two friends, but a large group, creating, I guess you could call it a brotherhood of sorts, where each person has their back and can also communicate with each other siloed. But in terms of the broader group, you have this crew, brotherhood, whatever you want to call it, that follows you throughout your life and will be there in some capacity that the group's established to support you, to find a solidarity with almost, is very important and really actualizes the best aspect of that rule, where it's like, yeah, you do want that. Most people want that, where they're not on their own struggling. They want that community type feel where all these guys are hanging out with each other and they're looking out for each other. They got their six, right?
That's right. And I would say, not just your six, but also call me when something's up. I'm
Yeah.
available for your betterment, which is something people don't say that a lot. And just reaching out a little bit. I noticed in the mentorship family, or even in post college, like just a little bit of reaching, people respond to that like, oh, this is a need I've needed. And then you
Right.
might find out they're a great brother, but you won't know that unless you're willing to sacrifice. And I think that's uh, the real symbol of what it means, is that people are willing to sacrifice for one another.
I agree. And however, sacrifice if you have the means to do so and you're in the state where, well, you're you're good and things aren't like totally like chaotic for yourself. But in the same sense, when you're at your lowest point, you do have to find the willpower in yourself to ask for help, to ask for like assistance and kind of swallow your pride in a sense, you know?
Takes bravery. You can't. Brotherhood is anti-cowardice.
Yeah,
So don't be that way, and keep making friends that do want the best for you, and take care of yourself so you can take care of them.
that's a good note to end on.
With that being said, everyone, I hope everyone enjoyed watching. This is another podcast that I'm going to look back on. I'm really glad we did it. We may be doing more of these, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching.